All right. Another Monday, another 8 p.m., and another quick bites with HR bites. I think this has actually become so amazing over the months with love from each one of you that personally I have started looking forward to Mondays, very ironically. Come to think of it, my guest tonight is someone that each one of you asked for. My guest tonight is someone who is a doyen in the field of HR. My guest tonight is someone who will not do storytelling, who will not tell you how you can look at the fuzzy life of an HR professional, but someone who masters numbers apart from many other things that he also masters. My guest tonight is going to give us a masterclass, an absolute masterclass on today's topic, total rewards, something that money cannot buy. And I have absolute pleasure on bringing on stage my friend Amit Chincholikar. Hi Amit, thank you so much for being on Quick Bites with HR Bites.
Hey Sahil, thank you so much. It's a privilege being here, and considering that Mumbai Indians are playing RCB at the Wankhede Stadium tonight, where I am right now is probably the second best place that I'd rather be.
That is so sweet of you. And I know just a couple of minutes back when we were doing a lights and sound check, and I said, Amit, are you in love all over again? And you said, no, the glow is not love, but it is.
Dove.
And for those of you who don't know Amit, you have to know that he has a really amazing, funny bone. And in the middle of thousands and lakhs of rows in an Excel sheet, he can still pick up that beautiful humor and lighten the conversation and brighten the room. And Amit, I couldn't have been more grateful than to have you as my guest tonight, not watching the match, but being on Quick Bites with HR Bites.
No, absolutely. And finally, you'll know the outcome of the match when you look at the numbers, right? So the outcome, and I'm saying there is the process and there is the outcome. So as long as you know what the outcome is, sometimes while I agree that the journey is important, I think particularly from a numbers perspective, I think the destination makes all the difference. So the match will take care of itself.
Absolutely. And I don't know whether you had a chance to look at the comments on LinkedIn in your busy schedule, but when I actually created a Ghibli art of your photograph, someone came back and said, no, we want the original Amit because the mole is missing. And that's the patent style, right? So some people actually associate so beautifully. You can get whatever technology you want, you can play with whatever algorithm you want, but ultimately people know you for a certain thing that really stands out about you.
Yeah, well, that's true because the mole, so I was born in a place called Gwalior, which is on the, border of the Chambal Valley. And the Chambal Valley, as you know, is famous not really for statisticians or reward professionals, but for dacoits. So the mole is an indication of make what you will of it. And then I ended up in HR. So, it's the dacoit story playing itself out all over again. So, when Gabbar said, "Arey o Sambha, kitna inam rakhe hai sarkar hum pe?" That's where the number story comes from, right? Pure 50,000.
Brilliant. Brilliant. कितने आदमी थे अमित?
See, there you go. There you go. See, rewards is easy. I think we can end the class right here.
Absolutely. And we have a lot of people for the live audience as well. So on the chat, please do tell us which city you've joined in from, or which city were you born in? Where do you hail from? Tell us your name. Tell us which city you're from. And Amit, great to know you're from Gwalior. And of course, a lot of more things coming up tonight. So, today's topic, I think, is so important because everybody has been talking about this multi-generational workforce, and each generation talks about the other generation in such a different manner. But money has always been the common denominator after the barter system. We haven't really reached to anything else, but in a form, We've also come to Bitcoin and we've come to crypto, which is again a very different form of money. So let me bring the provocation right up and ask you, Amit. Amit, if you had a firm of your own and a 20-year-old kid walked up to you and saying, Amit, I really want to work with you, but don't pay me cash, pay me Bitcoin. What would your answer be?
Uh, well, personally, I would say that I really don't. I couldn't care less, right? Because I mean, given that it's my firm, and there is from a purely professional perspective, there is an outflow now. Whether the outflow is in the form of cash or Bitcoin or whatever, I actually couldn't care less. Professionally, I would worry because while I can take that route to pay, taking a route of Bitcoin is fraught more than anything else with security issues. And given everything that we go through from a, I wouldn't use the word GDPR, but purely from a security perspective where data gets compromised, I would then worry to say that in the interest of fulfilling a requirement or a choice that a 20 something has around Bitcoin, would I want to compromise the way I run my business from the point of view of exposing it to the kind of security challenges sometimes that we kind of go through from that perspective? So the answer, as always, would lie somewhere in between. But frankly, I would just be indifferent to a choice that someone would want to make.
Brilliant. If you go back a couple of decades, Amit, take us through the basics, right? Different roles. I know a lot of early career professionals would be out there saying, very confused. Should I choose marketing? Should I choose HR? Should I choose finance, supply chain, operations, healthcare, whatever, right? And therefore, I still remember when I was doing my master's, I had a lot of people telling me, hey, don't take HR because HR doesn't pay well. How does one decide which function gets paid what? Take us through that story in your experience. You have decades of experience in this space across various sectors. So give us a little bit of glimpse of how does one decide which function, how does one decide the starting pay range?
So let me try and explain this by an example, Sahil. Right? If you remember, maybe um, let's not go back 20, let's go back 30 years, right? When there was the advent of uh, there was something called MTV and Star that was entering India, right? And they were coming in, and they needed an animal that was called the network engineer, who was somebody who would understand how is it that the connection happens between a satellite and the dish that you put up, and the cable in terms of the way it enters your house and things like that. And the amount of money that these people were getting paid was astronomical for being able to do even mediocre work, right? And that's where the first principle to the question that you asked, in terms of how does salaries, especially at entry level, get paid, the first factor really is an issue of supply demand. So if you hear the biggest concern that young engineers have, right? It is the fact that over the last 10 years, while CEO salaries have gone up 2x or 3x, entry level salaries for engineers have pretty much remained flat, right? What an engineer was, and I'm talking not of niche skills, but what is it the general level entry level engineers are paid in, particularly in technology companies or technology firms. Now, the reason why that has remained flat is purely a function of supply demand. So, at times when you have a simple situation where demand exceeds supply, automatically salaries start moving up. At a situation where supply is exceeding demand, salaries remain absolutely flat. So, to come back to the original example that I talked of, the network engineers were paid astronomical amounts of money for a period of time when this whole thing was unfolding. Similarly, when telecom started out in the country, we didn't have any telecom professionals earlier. But the people who moved were primarily from FMCG, because you said telecom is similar to consumer. You've got to reach out, build the practice, build the brand, etc. The reason why people were paid astronomical salaries was because the supply of people who were available, who were willing to take a risk and move from FMCG to telecom because it was a risk, right, at that point in
Yeah.
time. And bear in
Mm.
mind, this was 20 years ago, right, where you know uh, not working for a company for any period less than 20 years was blasphemy. At that point, for people to be able to take that risk, there needed to be a trade off that took place. So that's how salary started becoming higher in a particular sector. Now what happens is, over a period of time, as you get in more and more and more talent and more people start coming in, automatically it's almost like water finds its own level. So you'll find that very often those salaries or those kind of things actually settle down. So primarily it's a function of supply demand. It's also a function of demographics. So if you look at it, India, in some ways, Indonesia, sometimes Vietnam, to some extent China, we are a relatively younger country. So which means we have a larger population that wants to work, right? Which means if you have a situation where there are enough number of jobs that are available in the country, there are people who want to go out and earn a living. So when you have a situation where that is kind of the composition of your workforce, that also has an impact. So again, if you've got too many people chasing too few jobs, right, automatically salary levels will come down. So it's not so much a function of whether HR or whether operations or whether marketing. In fact, if you look at it and go back and look at campus salaries today, you'll find, ironically, that some of the highest salaries that paid particularly on MBA campuses or on MBA campuses are in HR. And this is not to say, with due respect to all HR colleagues, either listening in or watching or having a point of view, that doesn't make us great or fantastic compared to operations folks. It's just that there are so few HR people, who kind of choose that as a profession, and the demand is so high given the way the world has changed, that the salary, kind of starts moving up. The thing is that eventually, like cyclicality hits all our businesses, most of our commodity businesses go through cyclicality. It's exactly the same with jobs. So like, for example, right now you will say, AI, digital, and all these terms that we all profess to talk about but very few of us really understand, right? You'll suddenly see there's a great demand to say, can I do this? What is the whole skill, what is there? And finally, when you find that AI is replacing a lot of replicable, similar, commoditized kind of jobs, what it's telling us is, maybe we didn't quite need somebody who was an engineer to do that job. If it was so replicable and so straightforward, did you really need an engineer to do that job? So I think somewhere the answer lies in terms of how the nature of work has changed. What is the nature of supply demand that actually kind of happens and takes place? And therefore, how is it that companies and organizations in general view specific functions that really give them the niche or the cutting edge? In some way. So slightly long-winded answer to a short question that you asked, but I mean, like you look at a mirror in a vehicle, right? Objects that you see in the
In the
mirror are
mirror.
closer than they appear. The subject to answer the question is slightly more complex than it appears to be at first glance.
Brilliant. And that's exactly why I said all our viewers that this is going to be a masterclass on total rewards, because Amit's depth on this subject is so fantastic that a question that started off as a function based question got dimensions of market forces, got dimensions of economics, which is demand and supply, got dimensions of geography, depending on which part of the world you are in, whether it's a developed country or not, got dimensions of demographics in terms of age and working population out there. Fantastic, Amit. I think that was very, very comprehensive. That actually gets me to think, and you spoke about campuses and you spoke about HR. How long does an individual keep reaping the benefits of being from a tier one campus? I've had this debate so many times in my career with team members, with employees, and otherwise, saying, "Hey, you know what? I didn't pass out from a tier one campus. I get it. Okay, maybe I started off at 5 lakhs. Someone else passed out from a tier one campus, started off at 40 lakhs. 15 years later, we're still doing the same job, but still the person has that leverage." Now, the question is, I'm not painting the same brush all across, but what's your view, Amit, on saying when does this leverage end? And should there be this leverage in the first place? And should the delta be so significant?
So I think there are three questions in what you asked, Sahil. One is, when should the leverage end? When does it actually end? And what explains the difference? Right?
Absolutely.
So, in my view, the leverage of what campus you pass out from, right, or what qualification you have, and the reason why I have a point of view on this is, in my last three or four organizations, uh, I've tried to work very hard to put a dimension around this. Not entirely succeeded, but at least planted or seeded the thought, is a maximum of 3 years. So the reason why I say 3 years is, assuming you start as an MBA, and first year is really around rotation, understanding, etc. Normally, the first job change that you do is 2 years subsequently. So you've done 1 year of rotation, understanding, etc. Then you've done a job for 2 years. That's where your leverage ends. Then you are done. Now, this is my view to say that therefore 3 years of it wears out, right? It's done. The reality is, I've had conversations with people who have said that I am, and this is a conversation maybe 1 year ago, where someone came and spoke to me and said, listen, I am a 2004 CA batch AI rank 36, and the guy you've hired is second attempt CA 2004. How come he's come into a different role and he's doing something different? And my response to that is, the fact that you're asking this question answers it in itself,
Absolutely.
right? So look, you can equate this to the movies, right? Which is that you can believe that you're a superstar, but frankly, you're only as good as your last Friday hit. And the whole point is, at a point in time, it was relevant, because maybe we didn't have enough role models, we didn't have enough people that you had to kind of look up to, and therefore comparisons were inevitable. In my view, the world has moved on, and not for any great reason. The world has simply moved on because beyond a point, whether we like it or not, no one cares, right?
Hmm.
So every time, I mean, I have a theory. Every time you have to call out that I am so and so batch of so and so institute, beyond a period of 3 years, it's setting you back. It's like,
Yeah.
I also have a theory that the quality and level of your experience is inversely proportional to the size of your CV, right? Here also, the more the people ask this question, the more it sets them back. Now, sadly, the reality is that there are still organizations that will continue to perpetuate this, and it comes down to a fundamental issue of, you are not able to differentiate, right? And if you're not able to differentiate, then the only lever that people have that they can hold on to is qualification or batch. Now, when companies that have institutionalized long-standing management trainee programs, be it Unilever or a TAS or any of these, right, just to name a few, when these companies have gotten past this, and I mean, TAS, for example, started in 1956, right? It's arguably the oldest management program in the country that you would have had,
Hmm.
that we've had.
Hmm.
If that program can move beyond starting to look at your batch and your qualification, I think it's time the rest of the world caught up. And
True.
if you were to look at the way the world is today, when you and me, Sahil, and by no stretch of imagination am I saying we are the same age. I mean, our hair gives that away. But when we ran races in school, right, there was a clear winner, opportunity, etc., all of that. So there was differentiation. A lot of schools now move to the concept of everybody is a collective winner. So
Hmm.
everybody has to run a race collectively. So we are all winners. Now, when everyone feels that we are all winners, then basically the feeling that you're saying is, we are all same, we are all similar, we are all equal. So then, why is it that he or she gets an unfair advantage, perceived unfair advantage over
Hmm.
me, is where the challenge is. So I think organizations, in my view, Sahil, need to take a call. Do they wish to differentiate? And there are nice, respectful ways of doing it, or do they
Hmm.
want to be socialist? There are merits and
Hmm.
demerits in each model. But if you want to differentiate, you have to get rid of the batch culture. If you want to be socialist, and again, absolutely no judgment, it works fantastically for a lot of companies. It works. And inevitably, you'll find that where you promote things like batch parity or recognize it or don't call it out as a significant or don't differentiate on performance, but say batch parity is similar, then it comes down to, without any disrespect, the way the IAS program operates, which means you are a DIG batch of 1982, 1984, you will end up compromising meritocracy, whether you like it or not. So these are calls that organizations need to make, and that's how I think it links back very well with rewards, right? I think we all make choices. We should remember that choices have consequences. The choices are in our control, the consequences never are. So you can't hate the consequence once you've made a choice, right? Simple as that.
Beautiful. Very, very nice. Very nice, Amit. Amit, also we've been seeing this huge wave around saying, while it's great to look at qualifications and pedigree, but ultimately it is skills that get the job done. And therefore, if you look at skill based hiring, it is very, very different from wherever you may have passed out from, because it doesn't matter where you pass out from or where you've done your degree, or whether, for a matter of fact, you're even a college dropout. If you have the skill, if you can get the job done, I need you on the team. What are some of your thoughts around this?
So look, I think skill is an indicator of ability to be able to learn or acquire something new. Because the great thing about skills is that they are constantly changing. So what's a great skill today may not be such a relevant skill tomorrow. We've seen that particularly in on the technology side, right? I mean, at some point in time, it was all about SAS. Then at some point in time we started saying Python. At some point in time, earlier in life, it used to be Java. Even before that, it was C++. Now, it's not like if you have a particular skill that makes you, how shall I say, uh, precious for a lifetime. So I think the key is the demonstrated ability to continue to learn. If you are able to demonstrate that, be it on a technical skill or be it on a behavioral or an application, it works really well. So if you think of it this way, a lot of companies like to think of uh, you know 10-minute delivery companies, or startups, or companies like for example Uber or Airbnb, that have essentially created marketplaces where buyers meet sellers without actually owning assets of their own. It is true that they are enabled by technology, but the key skill, in my view, and this may sound provocative, the key skill in some of these companies actually is not technology, because technology has enabled you to do something. And what is that something? You've solved a problem. So you've solved a problem of public transport by something like Uber. You've solved the problem of convenience of delivery through a 10-minute delivery startup or something like that you've created. You've enabled it by technology. So the skill, in my view, is not about a technical skill that people have. And I think, in my view, this is a mistake most people make. They say, listen, I have a technical skill that is relevant at some point in time, either as a programmer, or we are now talking about generative AI, or any of those. I'm saying a lot of that is temporary, right? And if you were to take an analogy from cricket, right, they always say that uh, skill is temporary, form is permanent, or form is
Hmm.
temporary, skill is permanent, whichever way. What I'm saying is that the ability to constantly learn, improvise, innovate. So therefore, in my view, if you were to ask me, Sahil, there is only one skill that will take everybody far enough if they want to, and that is the skill to be curious. If you are curious, you can solve everything, because when you are curious, you want to know, you want to solve a problem, you want to ask why. If you have that, believe you me, I don't think any problem in the world is that massive that it can't be solved, because people say it can't be rocket science. You'll be amazed to know how simple rocket science actually is, right? So I think
Ironic.
the yeah, I mean, the ability to be able to simplify and do the simple things right. So I think we keep getting caught into massive complexity in the name of skills. In some of the experience that I've had, however limited or biased it may have been, I have basically found if you are able to solve the ability to be curious, if you crack that skill, every other skill can be acquired, absolutely no problem. But the skill or the ability to ask the question when everybody else wants to have the answer, right, is the key differentiator. If you do that, and believe you me, it's much simpler than it sounds, and it's much harder because people choose not to do it in a lot of ways, but that is sufficient if you ask me.
Got it. Super. I think, Amit, as we really change gears, we often see that on one end of the spectrum, people are looking at devising total reward strategies, looking at a bouquet, looking at customization, flexibility, so on and so forth. And on the other hand, when you talk to junior folks, they say, "Yeah, finance and HR data never tallies." So, how does one bridge the gap between being very strategic about compensation and at the grassroots level for maybe MSMEs or small organizations solving the basic problem of saying, "Hey, finance doing this or we are doing this, but our books never tally."
So I think we must recognize that, and it's nothing to do with finance and HR. I think finance and HR folks can be great friends in my view. uh, we must recognize that these two will never tally, simply because the manner in which this data is looked at from a finance perspective and an HR perspective is very different. So
Hmm.
let's take a simple example, right? I mean, one thing that we typically cost in our CTC is gratuity. And we say gratuity is 15 days salary per completed year of service. So you need to reflect that as a number. So you reflect it as a number. Now, that's the number that you've got, and that's what you've put into your CTC, cost to company. The finance guy, when he's provisioning or when he or she is provisioning for this, will take a multitude of factors that comes from an actuarial valuation. So they will look at what is my liability going to be. And because gratuity is a defined benefit, right? Sorry for getting too technical here, but because gratuity is computed on your last drawn salary, the way you provision for it will never match 4.81%. So I think the key, right, is to be able to build a bridge saying, hey, we've got 10 elements. Of these 10 elements, 8 will tally line for line. These two will not tally. And the reason why they will not tally is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you're able to explain why the tallying is not happen, that is sufficient. So it's almost like what you do in business cases as a waterfall that
Hmm.
explains one number vis-a-vis the other number. It is
Yeah.
very easy to do that, because see, again, bear in mind, finance folks. So for example, think of a simple thing, right? I mean, you've got to go, let's say, meet a candidate, and you meet a candidate over a meal or a cup of coffee, and you submit that bill, for expensing. Now, as far as you're concerned, that's not part of your salary, right? It's operating expenses. Now, if some overzealous guy in finance puts this as part of employee expenses, there is no way in the world that you'll be able to absolutely tally these, because imagine there are um, 20 sahils who are meeting 20 candidates at 20 different points of time in the year, and imagine trying to tally every bill of receipt that is there, right? It's an accounting delight and it's an HR nightmare. So I think the key is to say, first of all, I think in my experience, the difference between the two should never be more than 3 to 5%. If the difference between the way finance is looking at a number and you're looking at a number is more than 3 to 5%, then something is amiss somewhere. The second is we must recognize that the way data gets reported and the way data gets counted is not always the same.
Hmm.
Because when you report data, for example, there are statutory norms around how you call out certain things. So for example, leave encashment, right? It doesn't reflect anywhere on your CTC, and in my view it should not, because the moment you start saying that leave is a way of earning money, then you're telling people don't take leave. So that can go into
Sending
the
the
whole
wrong
battle of
message.
work. Yeah, work
Yeah.
life balance and 70 hours, 90 hours staring at your wife, other people's husbands, or whatever else comes with that. But Therefore, if you are costing certain things and not costing certain things, I think the key is this. I think the solution to this, Sahil, always lies in a cup of coffee. And what do I mean by that? Go across and talk to the finance guy and say, hey, this is how I do it. Tell me, how do you do it? Right? And you'll
Brilliant.
find that there is a bridge where 90% of things tally. You need to agree to a model on how will the balance 10 tally. And then remember that when it comes to a conversation with even a promoter in an MSME, etc., the CFO or the finance guy will always be your best friend if he or she knows what you're trying to do, right? So if you're able to take them into confidence, because there's this one big myth about, oh my god, compensation is confidential, nothing should be known, I will keep it close to my, whatever, around basically saying information is the new oil, right? So I can't give it to anybody. I always say that the best way to make sure that everybody knows something or everybody comes to know of something is to say that it's confidential. So my simple belief is there is nothing confidential about compensation except individual salary numbers. That is unique to a Sahil or an Amit or anyone else. Everything else is around, if you are able to define the principle, the numbers take care of themselves. So I always say, right, every number tells you a story. And if you understand the story behind the number takes care of itself. So I think we need to, how shall I say, demystify this whole thing. And again, apologies to people who become the gods of Excel, by believing that compensation is about an Excel sheet. Again, in my view, Excel is a tool, right? It tells you a story, and it helps you validate a hypothesis that you may always have. But I think finance guys can be your best friends if you are able to understand sometimes the challenges that they have when they have to report. And all you have to do is build a bridge. So the answer is a cup of coffee.
Nice. Beautiful answer for a lovely question, which says it's not about getting out there, but actually coming and solving by understanding. And you don't need to necessarily have it to work in that manner. And I think that's a great perspective, Amit. Thank you. Uh, Gets me to actually think, right, that many a times you spoke about transparency and said apart from an individual number that is very specific to an individual, if it's a comp philosophy, if it's an approach, there's no harm in sharing that out, right? So that people are aware of what has happened. But many a times we also see that there are so many exceptions that then exceptions become the rule and the principle goes outside the window, right? And even if there are small exceptions or the magnitude is high or there is a context, explaining all of that becomes so difficult. And I've seen, coming from a family of doctors, especially the super specialized ones, they don't give too many details to the patient or the patient's family, and they say, hey, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Because the moment they start explaining too many details, then the patients of today's generation will immediately go on to Google, try and figure out what are the contraindications, what are the side effects, what did this medicine do to that, and actually make the doctor's life a lot more difficult. So where does one draw that line of transparency to say, okay, if I'm doing a compensation grid or linking performance ratings to comp payout, how much should I share versus how much should I withhold? Because the exceptions could actually stir the hornet's nest. So where does one draw the line?
So no, I had, I was fortunate very early in my career to have experienced a French saying, which loosely translated into English essentially means if you don't want someone to know, then don't do it, right? So I think the big challenge, and in my experience, the more transparency you provide, right, the more the people appreciate it. They
Hmm.
may not agree with it. So, I mean, my philosophy that I have found works most of the time is this: it is important that people understand what you're doing. They may not agree, and that's fine, but they should know why you're doing it. And if you think of your closest relationships that you have, right, even in life, right, I mean, be it with your mom or your siblings or anybody, you may not always agree with what they do, right, but you understand it,
Yeah.
right? So for example, if you're out of house late and mom says, hey Sahil, please call me and tell me where you are, you may not agree with it and you may get angry, irritated, but you understand, right,
Sure.
why she's doing it. It's out of love, affection, concern, etc., blah 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 blah.
Correct.
In my view, the same simple thing can be applied to the way you do your comp philosophy. So if your comp philosophy says we will differentiate on performance, then people should know that if there is an ability, that what does differentiation mean? And then your manager in the company becomes the custodian, not just the custodian, but the one who's answerable to say, hey, have I differentiated adequately or not? So I think the key is what people really appreciate is no surprises. So
Yeah.
if you keep moving the goalpost at the end, if you don't give people feedback about what is working and what is not working, right? That's where the challenge is. The challenge is never with the comp system. Because look, like I said, the comp system, the number is an outcome. If you manage your input, the output takes care of themselves. So if, for example, you tell people that we will pay at the median of the comparator basket that we go with, people may say, I don't agree with the comparator basket. Well, yeah, but that's not your decision to take. Why should we be at median? We should be higher at 66 percentile. You say, yes, but there is a reason. This is based on affordability. So you guys sell more, let us have more profitability. Can we move up the curve? By all means. So I think the moment companies actually realize this, that compensation is a really powerful tool to be able to let people know what the state of the nation really is, that's where its power can be strongly leveraged. But if we say, by the way, this is the grade, and there are a set of people who are first amongst equals, which I don't want to let anybody know, that's where the problem starts. So there is no system that is perfect, right? And I mean, the whole point is, if it could have been done in that, let me put it this way: if it was so simple to solve, we would have solved for it by now, right? But I think it comes back to your intent, because what
Yeah.
happens, Sahil, is that we judge ourselves by our intent and everybody
Rather
else
by
by
that.
their actions, right? Hence the origin of the phrase mera wo matlab nahi tha. So if people understand, so if you call out clearly, we will differentiate on performance, then the people who are differentiated, if they get paid more, then they agree to the message, right? They understand. Someone else who's not differentiated may have a complaint saying, I was not appraised well, but that's a separate problem to solve. So you should be very clear about how is it that some of these things can be done. In my view, the more transparency you provide, tell people where do they stand in the salary range, tell people what is it that they need to do to be more competitive, and in my view, it lines up very well with your talent philosophy. So
Yeah.
you had asked the question some time ago, right, on how is it that we can kind of solve for some of the gaps or inadequacies. If companies are willing to give their internal people greater mobility opportunities to take on a role, right? If people are willing to invest, to say, hey, even if you're 50% ready, I'm willing to invest in you to ensure that you are able to take on a higher role. And that, by the way, translates into a compensation which is X or Y or Z. People appreciate your intent, because you're saying that as a company, because I believe in innovation, in risk, I'm willing to take a risk with you and I will invest from my side. So that whole transparency process around how is it that people can manage their careers and things like that becomes important. Because one thing that has changed in today's day and age, Sahil, in a lot of ways, is that people have choices, right?
True.
And people prefer it if you are able to have a straight direct conversation. I mean, you talked of younger people coming into the workforce, right? It is this set of younger people that we taught or encouraged to stand up and talk. Now we
Yeah.
can't tell them to shut up and sit down,
Correct.
right? So we've got to provide as much information as required for people to be making informed choices. Will we lose a lot of people in the bargain? Some people, absolutely. But if your philosophy is not clear, right? If there are because nobody likes anything more than an inconsistency, right? If I say that I've had a bad year and therefore people will not get paid, people may not like it, right? But they will accept it till they find out, by the way, someone else got paid. It is that pisses off people, right? So if you are able to maintain consistency to align to a principle, right? When that happens, then the power of what is it that your reward systems can actually do will really, fantastically kind of come through in a lot. And I think some companies have been able to really crack that problem very well. A lot others struggle because it's seen as the domain either of two or three people to say, I will use this to leverage to do it. And there are so many times that I've seen rewards professionals or CHROs to say, oh, I'm not going to give 5% increase to this person. And I'm like, that money is not yours to give,
Hmm.
right? You are like a cashier at a bank. The money
Yeah,
is passing through your hands, it's not yours. So being a custodian, right, and showing excessive ownership are two different things. So
very
the
true.
point is that you are on a variable pay plan and you start treating it as though it's an ESOP, showing excessive ownership. I don't think anyone needs that.
Got it. Amit, also the whole concept of enough is never enough, right? Compensation is something which really, someone got a bumper year, that becomes baseline, and then they never cry because they've had an amazing time. And the next time the same person gets something less, because the benchmark is set there, people are saying, hey, you know what? I wasn't treated fairly, things didn't work out well, so on and so forth. How does one bridge this gap? I know you spoke about regular conversations, you spoke about feedback, which is great on performance. But the linkage between performance and comp payout, bonuses, increments, how does one rationalize that as part of culture to communicate it very effectively to say, listen, don't expect what you were expecting earlier? Or certain businesses need to rationalize other businesses because those are investments. So do in your experience have organizations actually covered that journey of that adequate communication, or do you still see a gap? And why is this gap there when it's no rocket science like we discussed earlier?
So I think again the gap is because we don't think this through adequately in advance. So what do I
Okay.
mean by that? Let's you talked of the fact that there's a bumper year, and you get a great bonus. Now research always shows that the impact of a great bonus that you get, lasts for how long? One day. It's one day. So the salary hits your account like, this is the month when people are going to be waiting appraisals. HR guys are the most handsome guys, and they sing well too during this season, right? But 30th April, after salary hits, 1st May, people forget. It's done and dusted. Now what happens is, once that is done, in most companies, so how is it that we can keep that cycle going? Most companies are expected to do quarterly result reporting that you do either because it's required, it's mandatory, or because it's just good practice. But how many of us really think about going back and talking to our people on how the quarter has gone? And by the way, when you compare quarters, if you look at it, you compare it Q1 vis-a-vis Q4 of last year and vis-a-vis Q1 of last year, right? So you say 12 months ago, this is how we did. And by the way, this is how we were 3 months ago. Now, if we are able to communicate that message in that and tailor that in, and it again comes down to how much of, how shall I say, influencing communication that you're able, or compelling communication that you're able to build in becomes important. When you say, listen, we set ourselves an aspirational number to grow significantly, we are not on track for that number. So, guys, we are only as good as our last Friday hit. Just because we made a good movie last year doesn't mean the movie is going to be repeating itself, right? So you've got to go back and you've got to start doing it day after day. So the analogy that I always like to use is that what we do at workplace, people like to believe it's cinema, but in my view, what we do in the workplace is actually theater.
Mhm.
So cinema, you have the concept of a retake,
Retake.
right? So if you don't do it again, it goes wrong. I mean, if it goes wrong, you can't do it again. In theater, you did an outstanding show yesterday, but you've got to do it again and again and again every single day, right? The reason why Usain Bolt is considered one of the greatest sprinters, right, of all time, if you think of it, right, over a period of 12 years, he basically won 12 races, 4 races in every Olympics. The reason why he's considered amongst the great, so basically if you look at it, everything that he's done is in less than 120 seconds.
Hmm.
right? Less than 2 minutes. The claim to fame is what? It's consistency about going out and being able to do it every single day, right? So if our message is around that reinforcement every quarter to say, hey guys, we are not on target. Hey guys, we're doing well. Hey guys, we did this well. These businesses are doing well, but these businesses aren't. Now, sometimes what happens is because we get caught in making sure that we're communicating with investors, with analysts, with whatever, we tend to forget that there is a small but significant constituency known as the employee who will also benefit from this information. So if you provide that, if you do it adequate, and again, I think a lot of companies do it simply, singularly with things like town halls. It represents a great opportunity to be able to continue to make these points. We must also understand that look, this is not this is not a maths exam, so you will never score 100 out of 100. There will be people who will not understand. So I think the
Hmm.
key thing for the comp professional and the CHR or the business partner is to recognize who are your key constituencies and make sure that their alignment is there to be able to understand how it's happening. If you seek 100%, it's not going to happen. And then you end up with the Pareto principle, right? You devote so much time to try and convert the unconvertibles that you forget that there is a set of people who are already available. So a lot of comp really comes down to how well do you know your people? How often are you connecting with them for something that goes beyond the communication of a number? So finally, coffee and conversations tells you so much about people.
Got
So
it.
if you are able to do that simple thing, right? So I mean, for comp professionals or all of us, get the head out of the Excel sheet, right? There is a bit of a world out there, and remember, every employee is not a number. The moment you start treating an employee as a number, then you've made it a commodity. And if you want to treat it as a commodity, then your job can be done better by a commodity buyer. Or if you treat everyone like a number, then your job can be done better than by a CFO. So if you don't humanize it, right, it's not going to work.
Well, brilliant. Brilliant. Now, as I actually put myself in the shoes of an employee, two things come to mind that actually create a little bit of angst, right? One is when you receive a letter or you receive a number or you receive an increment and you go back to your boss and say, hey, tell me, how is this put up? And this person says, hey, I have no idea. Let's check with HR, right? That is, as you mentioned earlier, right? Conversations need to happen with immediate performance managers. And if a response like this comes up, you feel, hey, how can this person not know? Maybe he knows, but he's deflecting. Or maybe she's aware, but she doesn't want to entertain, or whatever, right? So that's
You're
one
right.
area of angst. And the second is, like you mentioned about the bot doing it or anyone else coming in. When you look at remembering the days of Milkovich and the green textbook, right? We all studied internal parity, external competitiveness. Those two words have always stuck with me. Um, in an economy where we either build or we borrow or we actually buy talent, right? We can buy talent from outside, we can build it internally, or we even borrow it, or like they say, you can replace that talent layer with a bot to do what that bottom of the pyramid talent was doing. In all of these cases, people get that angst to say, hey, you could have given me that same money, I would have done the job better. Or I am anyway doing the job, but you're buying someone from outside at a much higher comp because of market forces. And I have been in the organization for a longer period of time and correction has not happened, or so on and so forth. That leads to angst. So, how does one solve this angst issue? And there are two separate questions. One is with immediate performance managers deflecting conversations to HR, and what can HR's role be to empower performance managers to communicate the comp philosophy? That's question number one. And question number two is internal parity versus external competitiveness. Where does one really ensure that we are doing the right thing that is fair and transparent while keeping business objectives in mind?
So look, if we again go back and look at extended families, right? We always have that one uh, cousin, right, who we all love very much, but we know the guy or the girl is a rogue, right? Because we know he or she kind of may lie or may not be completely reliable, or you have that friend who, when you go out for dinner and the time comes to split the bill, immediately gets up and conveniently wants to go to the bathroom, right? We all have that. It's the same like these managers, right? So they will always be there. I think the key is this: as long as they are a minority, and they could be a significant minority, right? As long as they are a minority, you just have to learn to deal with it, right? Which is to say, they will come back and have a conversation, right, and say, oh, HR did this, etc., etc. Again, it comes down to the amount of transparency that you want to show. So if someone says, hey, you know what, I was given this rating, and this is what I was told, etc., all of that, etc., you say, either why don't you log on into the system and check, because this is factual, right? There is no perception about it. This is factual. And then one says that very often a lot of managers will rate people very high because they know that the moderation or the calibration will always take place, right? So there are two ways to do it. Either you mandate like a bell curve, and then the manager says that you change whoever's rating you want to. I don't know, I have given you my ratings, and walks away, you know taking the high moral ground in a lot of ways. So it's very simple, right? You say that the amount of money that's available is finite. If you believe that everybody in your system is ranked a 4 or a 5 on the higher end on a 5-point rating scale, by all means keep that rating. But bear in mind that your people who are rated 4 and 5 will therefore get significantly lesser money than the other people who are rated 4 and 5. So you decide what question you want to answer. Do you want to demotivate people by giving them higher ratings? Because that's what will happen. They will come back and say, I was rated a 5, he or she was rated a 5, how come they got 15% and I got 10? And then you say, by the way, it's your manager's call, because everybody got an identical budget. Everyone I'm saying it is possible to do this in a nice way, factually, by being able to present data on this, right? I think what has also happened is that these managers get found out very easily. So people know who these managers are, right, over a period of time. So in my view, sometimes you should just let things be. See, we don't live in a perfect world, right? There will be challenges. Um, and I mean, who are we to kind of pass moral judgments around whether people do things well, they don't do things well, etc. See, beyond a point, like I said, there is no point taking excessive ownership. If there is a point wherein you are administering things or defining a philosophy that has been bought in a particular way or a particular manner, as long as majority of the people are aligned and are following it, that should be good enough. So as long as the number of angst that are there or number of complaints that are there are not massive number or big number, you should be able to go about solving each one of them diligently. In my view, you should never make responses personal. So the worst thing you can say is, why don't you go ask your manager? That's personalizing the issue. You say, hey, listen, you know what, Amit? This is the way we run the system. This is the way the ratings are rolled out. This is the way, this is the process is. This is the guidance that was given to all managers, right? This is what emerged as far as your department is concerned. Then you ask, when you set your goals, did you have a conversation? So it's a tough job. It's not an easy job to be able to do that,
Yeah.
right? But I
Yeah.
think, again, if you are able to demonstrate the consistency of the way the system runs, then people will recognize that there's no point ranting against the system because it's working for majority of people, right? That's point number one. To your point of internal equity versus external competitiveness, look, I'm a great fan of saying that even if people are 50, 60, 70% ready, right, you must give them opportunities internally. So the
Hmm.
best way that I've seen of doing this is, unless there is something that is a confidential search, right, which you don't want anyone to know, we must advertise every job internally. Let people know.
Hmm.
One of two things will happen: people will either apply for a job, right, or they will not apply for a job. If they don't apply for the job and then say, hey, you got in that guy or that person, and why are you paying them more compared to me when they are my same batch or same pedigree or same qualification, you say, buddy, the job was open, right? You chose not to apply, right? So I'm you can only create equality of opportunity. you cannot create equality of outcomes ever, right? So
Beautiful.
that's point. Yeah, that's point number one. Point number two, let's say the person applied and you didn't find the person suitable. You should be able to let the person know what is it that the person missed or what is it that the person lacked. So you say, listen, this is working well for you. Here are certain things that weren't there that we didn't see, etc., etc., and that didn't happen. Therefore, maybe another opportunity will turn up, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, I need to go out and look for somebody. Now, the person may not agree with your judgment, and therefore the person may leave. And that's fine. Because the moment you didn't take the person for that role, as an organization, you've made a choice to say that I am okay if this person leaves if I don't give them that role because they are not suitable for that role. So it's a conscious choice you've made, right? And then if the person wishes to continue, you are being respectful. And I think the whole point is people believe that for to do something like this, you have to be devious, manage it in a particular way. You'll be amazed at the number of people who appreciate the transparency and sincerity with which you can have this conversation, right? So does it require effort? Of course it does. Is it an easy job? Not at all. But hey, someone's got to do it, right? And I think if you were to start thinking of it, if you again go back to doing the three, four, five things right, which is, practice transparency, make sure there is consistency, communicate, 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 and make sure that you seek understanding. You don't necessarily seek acceptance. Majority of the things will fall into place. If after all this there is still a significant revolt against what you've done or what you've come up with, then probably there's something wrong in the way you've designed it. So I think it's fairly, the simplest things in life, Sahil, in my view, come in when you do it in. So if you look at, there is a great organization called Rotary International, right? Rotary always, there is a simple four-way test, right? That they call out, right? So simple things that you have to do, if you are able to get three or four things right, and if you know what those three or four things are, it's good enough. The challenge, I think, is we don't invest enough time into what those three or four things are that we need to spend time on. And then we just get into market is doing 9.2, 8.6, 5.5. Okay, all that is fine, right? Again, those are
Hmm.
numbers, those are outcomes. So
Yeah,
it is possible to, and the best run organizations actually have got a great balance between internal equity and external competitiveness always. So it's never an easy thing, it's a function of multiple things. But I think by doing these three or four things on an ongoing basis, the opportunity to do it right is significant.
got it. Super. I think we started off this conversation talking about various factors like demographics, market, demand, supply. But if I have to contextualize it to pay structures or pay bands, what is your view on rationalizing roles, on job families, on looking at overlaps in pay bands? Should they be there? Should it be a fixed band? How does it play out? Should there be good amount of flexibility, or should it be slightly more structured so that people don't misuse them? What are your thoughts on some of these aspects?
So I think, Sahil, that is an outcome of what is the kind of business that you are in. If you are in a, how shall I say, large scale organization, commodity business, where broadly the thematic is around stability continuously, there is a particular pace, there is a, it's hard to use the word in today's day and age, but there is a degree of predictability. Then you must build pay ranges, because you are like a, how shall I say, you are like a freight tanker in an ocean, right? You're
Hmm.
going
Hmm.
around at a particular pace, you are steady, you are dependable. But by the way, if you have to turn 10 nautical miles ahead, you have to start planning it now, right? So if you are in that kind of structure or in that kind of organization, by all means, structured pay ranges, because then a lot of work that you have to do is around consistency and parity. That's what people want, that's what people are seeking. If you're in a slightly more dynamic setup, right, then in that setup pay ranges and things like that may not make much sense at all, because then the essence of what you're trying to solve for is basically what you call as brouhaha, right, which is organized chaos. So in that setup you are not really a freight tanker, you're a speedboat, right, which means you will go
Hmm.
really fast in the ocean. You may have to keep changing direction constantly. You may even fall off because you're doing it in too much speed. But hey, you've got a life jacket that allows you to come on and you can course correct very quickly. So I think there are organizations that will need to be in that phase, right? A lot of people who are in startup mode, I think the only problem is
Mm.
you can't remain a startup forever, right? I think that's the big challenge that we kind of tend to end up with. But if you are in that kind of space, then I think the key word is the word you used, which is it should allow you and provide you with flexibility, right? Flexibility very often I think is a function of agility, and I'm using agility differently than speed. I think speed is just mindlessly going after, I need to hire, therefore finish it by day after tomorrow and get the person. I think that is mindless speed, right? Because you are compromising the medium term just by getting in somebody. So you are saying kal ka kal dikhenge, aaj ka problem solve kar lo, right? The moment you start doing that, I mean, this is not a semester 6 engineering exam, right? That you can study on the last day and expect to come out with flying colors. It's slightly more complex than that. So I think as long as firms recognize that that's the way it is. The other is in the knowledge based economies, right? I mean, if you look at, for example, law firms, consulting firms, they will pay very differently. While they may have pay ranges and all that, they swing dramatically a lot around performance, because for them differentiation, because you've got knowledge workers, is very significant from that point of view. So where you are predominantly driven by human capital to a greater extent than other businesses, uh, that's where, if you need to have a little bit more of flexibility in terms of the way you do things, it's needed. Again, I think as long as you can explain it, right, and more importantly you should be able to explain it to yourself as to why you're doing it, I think it's good enough.
Yeah, yeah. I think as we come to the end of this conversation, and of course, a surprise element that you don't know that's coming your way, but I think,
Okay.
many a times they also say that people leave for a lack of rupees, right, at junior levels, because that money is big money for them, right? Then they also say there's another narrative that, if you want to have a compensation conversation with a candidate, that's the most transactional form of engagement with the candidate. And we've seen that when you saw an employer's market versus an employee's market in different waves of COVID, right? And
Yep.
then you also see that for some people at senior levels, strategic levels, money is one of the, three or four or five in the list, but there are a couple of other factors that take precedence. Um, how do people understand this to say, when I look at total rewards, and if there's an HR professional out there, how does that person gauge what is Amit looking for? Because Amit could be a senior HR professional, but still his number one priority may be money. Or Amit may be a senior HR professional, but his number one priority may be the vision of the organization and how he can help take it to the next orbit. So, how does one figure that out through conversation? Any quick tips or hacks, or getting into the mind of the candidate to understand total rewards?
So I think two principles, right? Transparency and fairness. And I'm using fairness in some ways interchangeably with consistency. Now, to your point that different people have different needs, there's no doubt, right? I mean, people do have different needs. We must recognize that there are certain needs that we can meet and certain needs we can't, right, as an organization. So if someone says I do not want I'm using an example, right, PF, theoretically it's possible, but if you have a philosophy that says no, PF is really important and whatever, you may still look, that's fine, and I don't like kareli ka sabji when it's made, but whenever it's made, nothing else gets made instead, so I have no choice but I have to eat it, right? So there are certain things that you must recognize as an organization which are non-negotiables. I think everything else can be flexible. I think the big challenge again is we don't talk enough to our people. So there are sweeping generalizations saying young people want more cash and old people prefer retirals. But
Okay.
that doesn't account for the 65-year-old who wants to do skydiving because his or her children may have settled overseas, or the 25-year-old single mother or single parent for whom insurance is important. So I think sometimes it's just the fact that you're giving people a choice on what to do, right? So think of when you're, if you're trying to go out as a family for dinner, right? Sometimes very often what happens is someone will say, okay, let's go out for dinner, we'll go to this place. And then the response may be, but why go there? I don't want to eat this. I don't want to. And then it degenerates into a conversation where everyone ends up at a place where they thought make someone else happy and no one is happy at the end. Instead of someone asks the question around not where we want to go, but what do you want to eat?
Eat.
क्या खाने का मन है? And then you
Hmm.
find a place where everyone is able to find, what they want, and then everyone says कि ठीक है, I will compromise one thing, right? कि ठीक है, even if we go to a South Indian place that serves Chinese, because everyone else has, ठीक है, I will not get to eat steamed momos the way they are made at a Chinese place, but it's okay, I can live with it. So I think it's what I like to call the illusion of choice. So if you ask the question on what do you want, what are you seeking, right? Very often people will come back and say, whatever you're giving me, it's kind of fine. But I think having that conversation is really, really important. The other is, while we should not place money at the center of our existence, we cannot deny its importance. So,
Hmm.
taking this high moral ground around saying, oh, what is this? How is it that you don't understand the importance of money? Or, why is it that you're placing so much importance on money? You're leaving for a lakh of rupees or whatever, tomorrow, what this thing would have been there. If you realize that a lakh of rupees means so much for that person, and if it doesn't matter so much for that leader, maybe you could have given 0.5% lesser to the leader and made sure that people down the line are able to get more money for that because it impacts them more, right? So I don't think these are difficult choices, right? And I'll just take 30 seconds to illustrate this, that we had as an example when we saw during COVID, right? What would happen is during COVID we would tell everybody, okay, log on and we want to see everybody's cameras on and do it, etc. Now the senior leaders, right, they had their jug of water that was there, nice one space, wonderful Wi-Fi, everyone would log on. And what we realized is that a lot of our salespeople were not logging on early during the calls, right? So we asked why. We thought to ourselves, why is it happening? Because the normal reaction is, oh, these guys are doing something else. They are not attending. They are not giving time. What we figured is, never in the history of our lives had we thought that in a family of four, you will need four laptops. You didn't have it, right? But now yourself, your spouse, and both your kids, everybody studying online, and therefore you don't want, you're not sure on how is it that the noise level is carrying, what is happening. The second is, in a CEO's house, the backdrop is like it is in your house or it is in my house, right? We are privileged. But for the sales rep, he or she is ashamed about the fact that there are clothes that are drying at the back of his or her house that you don't want to be seen. So therefore, if you tell people that, hey, you know what, your children's education is your biggest priority, let their school get over and we will do calls in the afternoon. It's a
Hmm.
simple message of realization that you get to recognize that everyone is not living the same life that you think you are. So I think just that sense of a little bit of empathy, right, very often gives you that sense of understand what is really important for people. And if you are able to fulfill that need, by all means, you must try. If you can't, then recognize again, like I said, choices have consequences. When you make choices, you have to live with their consequences. So that's the way it works.
Wonderful. I think sometimes it's all about understanding and taking the effort to understand and just keeping calls in the afternoon to just actually make people feel comfortable. I think that was such a powerful message, Amit. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to come to, I have a lot of things on my mind as far as total rewards is concerned. We haven't even touched ESOPs, but I think we're conscious of time because I know you've also had a very long day. I want to come to the last segment, and this segment apparently is very popular with the viewers, and they want to see you rapid, and they want to see you fiery, and of course, they want to see you tongue in cheek, and they want to see you hitting bullseye by finding the number in the Excel sheet, but more importantly, humanizing your answer because you're such an amazing professional. So, Amit, are you ready for the rapid fire?
Bring it on.
Okay, so let me start with a 65-year-old who wants to skydive. The first question coming your way, Amit, is what's the one perk you've seen that money can't buy?
I think it is the gesture at an employee's personal situation that is there, be it either marriage or a child in the family, or the child of a, or the wedding of a child, or one of those, which is very personal, that allows an individual to know that you have partaken in their joy or in their moment of grief or sorrow, is the single thing that is unmatched. It works every
Beautiful.
single time.
It works every single time without fail. The small things matter, the personal things matter. Brilliant, Amit. Thank you. We spoke about this internal parity, external competitiveness. If you had to pick one, what would it be?
External competitiveness, because at the end of the day, we must not kid ourselves. There is one business that we are all in, which is the business of money, and therefore at the end of the day we are, if we have to be competitive, you have to keep looking outside. So external competitiveness, otherwise you just die.
Got it. Culture as compensation. Is it a movie or is it theater? I'm picking from the
uh,
last discussion we had on movie versus theater.
I think it's a stand-up comedy show, actually.
Wow. Say more. Say
Because,
more.
yeah, because look, I think, uh, what is, at the end of the day, humor is, life's tragedy that is explained, in a funny way. So I think compensation is a little bit about managing Maslow's hierarchy, which is the bottom to the top. So it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. And the greatest asset that a stand-up comedian has is the ability to laugh at himself or herself. That's really what makes them successful. So I think the ability to be able to reflect back on what is working, what is not working, at an individual level, kind of makes the impact. The other is, you can't use the same jokes sometimes even on different audience, because they've seen what you've done before, right?
Right.
That's how I think stand up comedy is different than theater, right? Theater, people know what to expect. Stand up comedy, you don't know. And it works best only when you really know your audience.
Absolutely. Brilliant. The last point actually nailed it. If you don't know your employees, you can crack whatever jokes, it's not going to sit well with them. Building on stand up comedy, I think a lot of stand up comedy is going wrong of late. What's the one thing on compensation which should completely be avoided as a mistake?
uh what should be avoided in compensation as a mistake? I think it is, making it either the most important thing of your philosophy, or making it the least important thing of your philosophy. So, the moment you say that I will pay the best in the market, theoretically, if that's the most important factor, then people who pay the most should never have any attrition. The other is to expect that people will come and work for love and fresh air, is also, a bit of a myth. So recognizing that, your answer will tilt either way. And the other is, it's a dynamic story, right? You can continue to live, in the past, and then, history will kind of pass you by, and you will kind of wonder what happened in some way. So you should, like I said, you should not place it at the center of your existence, but you should never deny its importance. It is a very, very important piece, a critical piece, a significant lever, but it can't solve all your problems.
Got it. Beautiful. We spoke about perks earlier. Let's move to rewards. What's the one reward that always works, no matter the age group?
What's the one reward that always works? Okay, I think it is,
What's the one
it's a
reward that always works, no matter the age group? Yeah.
I think it is, I will go a little bit on the non-monetary side. I think it is a recognition of a job well done, right? Because I think the one fundamental human need is always about recognition. So, even just saying, pat on the back, saying, "Well done." I mean, unless you happen to be, without meaning any disrespect, in an investment banking firm, when you were to say, well done, and the hand goes out to say, but what does that translate into? I think in every other situation, a recognition of a job well done is the greatest reward that you can use effectively. Again, it's not, you just can't keep saying well done all the time, but doing anything monetary without the concept of a of being well done, always works. Because if you go back to school days, right, your report card came out well, but imagine if you were to be given a bicycle that is parked outside and the keys left on the ledge and said, okay, we committed that you would get a bicycle if you did well, here, ride it. As opposed to someone saying, listen, Sahil, well done, this is so good, and by the way, I know I had promised you a bicycle, but can I give it to you in 3 days? I mean, it's likely to work better. So I think the ability to just pat on the back as a recognition of a job well done is a big deal.
Got it. We spoke about fairness and transparency, but tell me, who decides what is fair compensation?
I think the market decides it, Sahil, because
Beautiful.
your value at the end of the day is a function of your employability. And if you are eminently employable, you'll always find the most employable people are the ones who are most secure, and that's what allows them to
Hmm.
always do well consistently, day after day, time after time. Because if you know that there is value to the skill that you bring, or what is it that you can deliver, there is always somebody out there who will be able to uh, kind of recognize that and value that. So I think fairness is actually decided by market.
Got it. While this was a master class and we wanted to talk about ESOPs, we didn't get a chance, but I'll ask you a rapid fire question. Uh, what's the biggest myth about ESOPs? If, in one sentence, if you had to answer.
That they can make millionaires out of a, for a large mass of people. That's the easiest way to become a millionaire. I think that's the biggest myth I've ever seen.
So ESOPs is the easiest way to become a millionaire, a billionaire. Brilliant. Okay.
That's like I said, that's the biggest myth that I've heard or
Got it.
seen.
Have you ever tried to buy loyalty or seen anybody or known of anybody who's tried to buy loyalty and has it worked?
So I know lots of people who've tried to do it, and I have never seen it work. Simply because there is, like I said, how is it that you put a price on loyalty? There is no way, right? So think in life, how is it that you can buy loyalty of a friend? How is it that you can expect loyalty, or put a price on loyalty to a spouse? Because like I said, the moment you start monetizing or try to buy loyalty, uh, it's you're setting yourself up for dangerous territory, because in that equation, one of the two will always start believing that they're better, right?
Hmm,
So the moment that equilibrium in terms of an equation gets impacted by the way you're trying to do some of these things through loyalty, it doesn't work.
got it. Got it.
Because
I think we spent.
loyalty, if you go back to the Roman times, was actually a master slave concept, right? So
Hmm, hmm,
the slave had to pledge loyalty to the master.
right.
So that's what loyalty comes down to. It is a master slave relationship.
I guess boiled down to that. Okay. I think we spoke about this very nicely where Amit, you said you can have your, let's say on a 5 point scale, 4 and 5 raters, top performers. You could do 30% of them, but then they'll get only 10% bonus. Or you could do just 10% of them, but get them a much higher bonus as compared to a 3 rater, right? How do you ensure that your best performer doesn't feel underpaid? Apart from this example that we spoke about, what else can one do given the constraints or the context of respective organizations?
I think it is about recognizing for how long does it happen, right? If your best
Hmm.
performer is consistently underpaid over a period of, for example, 2, 3, 4 years, then that's a conscious choice you have made. Because you could be constrained in 1 year, you might end up being
Yeah,
constrained in 2 years. You can't be constrained for a lifetime, right?
true.
So again, go back to the same example, right? Hey Sahil, if you do well in fifth standard, you'll get a bicycle. Oh, I couldn't get it this year, there is a problem, but you'll get it next year. Oh Sahil, well done in sixth standard, but I can't get you a bicycle again. Then beyond a point, you say, listen, are you actually interested in giving me that bicycle or not? And the
Yeah.
answer is probably no. So you can keep your bicycle. I'll go and figure out what I need to do next. So I think people understand there are always constraints at a given point in time. If there are people who don't recognize that and say, listen, I will not accept a single exception, then I don't think that performer is worth keeping, right?
Hmm.
Because, and you will have people like that. But if it continuously keeps happening over a period of time, then there is something wrong with you.
Got it. My last question for today, though I would have loved to go on and on and on, but I know we are running out of time. You got to complete this sentence for us, Amit, please. Money can buy salary, but it can't buy.
Loyalty.
Oh, the circle completes itself so beautifully.
You made it
That
so
is
easy for me,
brilliant.
Sahil.
That is absolutely brilliant, Amit. Amit, thank you so much from so many different topics. And I wanted to do this one slightly differently as a masterclass, getting slightly technical about total rewards. And I think I love the way Avinash, one of our live viewers, has also said, I feel even closer to this topic now. Brilliantly and beautifully illustrated concepts of rewards. Amit, thank you so much because I know a lot of people have this stigma, fear. Oh my God, this is very difficult. I don't like numbers. I don't like math, so on and so forth. But I think this podcast or this series of this podcast as a masterclass to my mind is absolutely brilliant. And thank you so much, Amit. And I'm just so grateful that you decided to be here this evening.
No, thanks for having me, Sahil. And I think this is, like I've said, it is never rocket science. So I think if we do, it finally comes down to the fundamentals of the way we define, a strong relationship, which is it's about making sure that you do the basics right every single day, day in, day out, day in, day out. And like I always, sometimes like to say that between the flashing, dashing boyfriend and the dull boring husband, over a period of time you'll find that the dull boring husband always wins. So that's the story of
Beautiful.
rewards for me.
Beautiful. You couldn't have ended this on a better note. And I think we have so many people who are still tuned in into this live podcast. Although we've taken 22 minutes beyond on time, Amit, truly, truly a big, big, big thank you. And there are a lot of comments on the chat, which you will see on LinkedIn once you log off. Priyanka, everybody else who's logged in, thank you so much for being part of the live audience. Everybody else who's going to watch this recording in the days to come, we hope you find this useful. Do let us know your thoughts and comments. And we're going to be back next Monday, 8 p.m. with another episode of Quick Bites with HR Bites. Amit, thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sahil, and kudos for such a great initiative. So there are a lot of things that money can't buy, and HR Bytes, I'm sure, is one of them. So thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you so much, Amit. Take care.
Take care. Bye now.